We're going to talk about properties and methods and events in this screencast. So just kind of want to show you an example of object hierarchy in VBA. It starts with the application, which is Excel, and Excel has a bunch of objects associated with it. For example, you can have an add-in like the solver add-in. There's also windows that pop up, workbooks, worksheet functions. So each of these objects has sub-objects. For example, inside of a workbook, you might have charts. The workbook has a name. You can have Visual Basic Project. When you bring up the editor, you're working in a project that's associated with the workbook. The workbook can have windows. The workbook obviously has worksheets. And if we zoom in on the worksheet object, it's got sub-objects. So it's got a comment. There are hyperlinks. You can have names to a worksheet, obviously. It has to be named. The page setup. And one of the most common is the range object. You can also have object collections like workbooks. Instead of just workbook, you can have with an S there that corresponds to all currently open workbook objects. You can have charts. You can have a collection of all the worksheets. So for example, referring to a worksheet called main, that's how you would refer to the main worksheet. Maybe you have a chart that's named XY. That's how you can refer to that of the collection charts. The complete object references really include everything from the application down to the specific thing that you're referring to. So for example, application.workbooks, the Excel application, you're talking about project 6 in the workbooks. Of project 6, you're referring to the main worksheet, and then range B16 on the main worksheet. A lot of times the application can be dropped. If you've only got one project open, you can drop the workbook name and you can just use worksheets.main. If you only have one worksheet you're working with, you can drop that and just refer to range. But if maybe your workbook has multiple worksheets, and if that's the case, you need to make sure that you're properly activating the different worksheets as you go back and forth between them. So let's talk about properties, methods, and events. Properties are attributes of objects. Methods are actions to be taken on objects, and events are happenings that objects respond to. So just some simple examples, and an example of a property would be range A1, so that's cell A1, width. So that's the width of cell A1. A method, it's an action that's taken on an object. So range B2.clear is clearing everything in range B2. An event, for example, when a workbook is opened, maybe when a worksheet is activated, or when a workbook is closed. So those are events. So there's lots of these, and I wanted to kind of show you how you can find more information about these. If you're more interested, you can go into the editor. And let me start with this closed, because this is sort of the initial view that you might have. You go up here to this object browser, or you can click F2. All the different associations between the different objects and properties. For example, let's look at range. So range is one of the most common ones. So you can click on range here, and then this tells you all of the different things that apply to range. For example, there's a activate here, and you have this little symbol here which denotes that it's a method. You can also have a range address, so that's a property. So this icon is for properties. You can clear, that's a method. This is how you can get more information on all of the different associations between the objects, properties, methods, and events. Let's take a closer look at the range object properties. The range object can have a value. Obviously that's what's stored in the cell. It can have text, and over here you see if you can write it or just read only. Value of the ones shown here is the only thing that you can change. Count, you can count the number of cells in a range. If the range is a single cell, you can get the column index and the row index. You can also get the address of a particular range. So for example, if I've got some data over here and I just do message box range A1, just kind of a little test, when I run this, it's going to spit out 4. By the way, if you leave off a dot something on range, the default property is value. So you could, if you want to, just type in value, or you can just leave it off, because value is the most common. If you wanted to maybe look at the color. So maybe we go over here and we make this orange. Type in interior.color index, and we're going to message box that when I run this. So orange has a color index of 44. Color index is something that you can write to. I can swap this around to write to that property, so the color index. I could say it's equal to 50, and when I run this, it's going to change that to a green, which corresponds to the color index of 50. Select, so you can select the cells in a range of cells. You can copy and paste, so if you did range c1.copy, this second position here is where you're going to paste it. You can also erase using .clear, and you can delete. So you can delete, and that shifts other cells into place. Let me just show you a couple examples here. This first one, selection.clear, is a method on our selection. So this is our selection. When I run this using F5, it's going to clear the selection, so that's a method. And maybe for this second one, this is also a method. We're going to copy, so we have range A1 to A4 dot copy. Then this second position here is where we're going to paste it. So I don't need to start with the selection because the object is the range. And when I run this, it's just going to copy that and paste it over there. So this is sort of just an introduction to objects, properties, methods, and events.